Okay.
Okay,
Haven't heard otherwise
so
from Barre.
why don't we get started? So calling the meeting of the Planning Commission to order for January 23rd. And first item on the agenda is adjustments to the agenda. Does anyone have any adjustments to add to the, or changes to the agenda? Hearing none, we can move on to public comment. I don't see any public in on the Zoom. There's nobody in the meeting room, is there? So
No, just myself.
we can move along from there. The next item is approval of the minutes from the December 12th meeting, and those were included in the packet. Uh, Anyone want to make a motion to approve the minutes?
So I noticed just a very minor mix up when I wrote the section that was moving. I listed them as 7A instead of 6A. So I'll make that adjustment, which is pretty minor, and submit it to Janet. So assuming no one else has any other corrections.
I don't, so thank you for that, and I'll move to approve.
Somebody making a motion to accept the minutes as the change?
I think Rosemary did. It's just a
I
little
did, sorry.
Oh,
hard
I'm
to
sorry.
I
hear.
think I said moved, and I should have
Oh,
said,
okay,
and then
okay.
I very quietly said I meant motion.
Oh, okay, I missed that. Is there a second? Okay, Caitlin seconds. And are there any other comments or suggestions, or can we go ahead and vote on the minutes? Okay, so all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye or raise your hand, or both.
I,
So we have approved the minutes. Next item, the next part of the agenda is old business. First item is Encore Renewable Energy Battery Storage discussion and possible letter of recommendation. In your packets, you had the letter, and then Janet sent out today some suggested amendments. So maybe I can turn the floor over to Janet.
Sure, thank you. I heard back from Sam this afternoon, and as some of you may have saw, and maybe not everybody, he had some suggestions. I put the letter with his edits on the screen so you can see it. Blue is what are his suggestions. And the X at the bottom refers to that portion of the letter that was about their donation, and Nicholas and I talked earlier in the week and thought that we should keep that separate from a letter of support, that Nicholas could do something about the offered contribution to the city separately than this. So my suggestion is to wipe out that entire last paragraph. So other than that, Sam was pleased with what I wrote, which I took right off that fact sheet that he gave us at the end of last year with his edits. So I'm happy to discuss with anybody. Anything else? I know Rosemary responded to the group about a potential ad. I can always let her speak to that. But that's
I'd
where
be
we're
happy to. Yeah, I'm not demanding anything. I just thought, a few years down the road, it would, I thought it might be wise to have something in there that we did in fact take into account how the neighbors felt. I don't know if you've followed up with him. It's been quite a while since we met with this guy. And I'm just wondering, I trust there's been no negative feedback from the neighborhoods or.
That's correct, Rosemary. So
Okay.
part of the solar application, they are required to notice all the butters. It's on the same list that came to us at the city that I forwarded to you folks. Same with the battery storage, all the abutters were notified. I asked Sam if he heard from anybody, and no neighbors have said a word. So
As long as you have that recorded somewhere, I would be perfectly fine to not include it in the letter. Or maybe it'll be in the minutes.
Yeah, I think that it might be fine to add to the letter that The commission is not aware of any objections from the neighbors to the project.
Okay,
I don't know, that might be a way to go at that. Anyone?
I
well, I
mean,
guess
neighbors
it's up
would
to
be
the
in
rest
butter,
of
so
them.
are you particular on a word, David?
Well, I was just thinking it's something along the lines of, as part of, I'm not sure exactly where to stick it in here, but to say, the planning commission is not aware of, that the abutting property owners were notified of the project, and the planning commission is not aware that there were any objections to the project.
Maybe in that, yeah, that second paragraph, since it talks about our understanding. Maybe,
Yeah,
Like right in here, second sentence, you think, Wendy?
You could just tack it on to the very end of the paragraph.
yeah, the end, I think works.
Just we further understand that, another statement like that.
Okay.
great, thank you.
Are there any other comments or thoughts about this letter?
Yeah, I just had one small one. Can you scroll to the end of it, Janet? It's not really a major thing. It just looks like David's name. It looks like there's like, I don't know, see that X out? It looks
Yeah,
funny.
it just got smushed
Yeah,
from Sam's edits. I mean, that'll be corrected in the final.
okay.
David
Yeah,
and
that's what I
Matt's.
figured, but I figured I'd mention it just in case he missed.
Sure.
Yeah, I do agree that it's probably better not to talk about the money piece of this as part of the letter. Ultimately that is going to be a city council decision. We could certainly suggest to them how the money might be used, but it's really going to be their decision.
Understood.
If no one has any other further comments, and I think we should send this along to city council. Certainly entertain a motion to that effect.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, Joe has made the motion. Is there a second to the motion?
Can second,
Okay,
Wendy.
Mindy seconded. And it's my understanding that we'll send this to the city council unless they have objections. It will then be sent on to the.
Correct. It's going to be in the packet tomorrow. So they'll see it under consent, and if they have any questions, obviously they can pull it off consent for discussion.
Okay, so is there any other questions or comments about this before we take a vote? Okay, if not, all in favor of approving the letter of support with the suggested changes, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Okay, so we've approved that draft letter, and it will go on to the city council and go from there. Next item on the agenda is Unified Development Ordinance revisions. And this is talking about downtown housing on the ground floor. Bunch of material included in the packet relating to that. Came at the request of Tom Lozon, who owns the property that he's planning to redevelop, and hoping he could put a couple of residential units in the back of the building, but the current zoning says you can't have residential within 100 feet of the front of the building, would prevent that from happening. And as far as we know, the 100 feet is a pretty arbitrary number. It wasn't developed in any scientific way or any particular reason. So, question is whether we might want to entertain a change to that and start the process of making a zoning change. I think the other thing Janet brought up is whether we should kind of wait and save that to be part of the downtown and, study that's going on that we'll be discussing later. I don't, I will be glad to hear any comments. I have some thoughts about that, but we should start with having other people think, number one, is this even a good idea? And two, is the language that is proposed a way to deal with this? And then number three is whether we want to initiate a process now or whether we want to put it on hold while the other things go on. One for comments if anybody has some. Caitlin,
A couple questions. The language that has been in the code that has been modified, was that something that Janet, that you are suggesting? If you said that, I'm sorry. I'm having a little. There's like a background noise. I think it's from the Janet from your mic, so I'm having a little harder time hearing some of what David was saying. But I just wanted to clarify that. I mean, as far as comments go, I liked the way that you revised the language because I feel like it does still meet the intent and spirit of the initial prohibition, which is to make sure that the street frontage of our downtown is commercial and we don't have people living in shop fronts with giant storefront windows facing out on the street. So that to me seemed like a good way to accomplish that goal of the original language while still allowing for some flexibility in specific cases where we have these larger buildings where the commercial space is really more than the market is needing. And given our housing crunch, which we've of course talked about a lot, seems like housing is a good way to fill some of that space and create, much needed housing in our downtown.
Yeah, I'm in support of this as well. I don't think I need to say anything more because Caitlin pretty much just said everything I was gonna say anyway. But yeah, so basically all of that. I have mixed feelings on whether going ahead with it now versus, putting it in later changes, but I do think it's worth pursuing.
I would
And don't
offer a
forget,
couple
Lisa's
of
spirit
thoughts.
of what the governor wants us to be doing is more housing in the state of Vermont, period. I think his acronym is called SPARKS. I don't know if any of you have seen that article. The desire to have 4,200 new housing units in the state, where we need like 67,000 over the next 5 years. This is a relatively easy change if you're in favor of it. Not very many other municipalities allow housing in their downtown that I could find. Montpelier does, just a couple others. And I tried to come up with language that made it fair and equitable for both sides of the street. Knowing that if you look at the rest of the attachments, most other buildings aren't going to be able to do it because they don't have the depth or the breadth of their buildings. But this makes it allowable to anybody who wants to at least attempt it.
One thought I do have is I definitely think it should require a conditional use permit.
Yes, you saw my question on permittable or conditional. I want us to discuss that because it may, a development may have to go in front of the development review board anyway, especially if it's a historic structure. But if you make it conditional, that's automatically has to go in front of the DRB. So on the page where we have our use table, where it says, multifamily, the single, duplex, triplex, etc. I would love to hear people's thoughts on what was X's and what we think it could be. And I'm totally on board with David making certain things conditional. It just makes the review easier and more thorough.
Yeah, I also think it just is a way of making sure that this front portion of the building remains viable for business to be there. So Wendy has her hand up.
Sorry, I had to find my mouse. I just had the edits. I think that mostly looks good. I just wondered if where it says the two instances where it says along the street frontage, if we should be specific about the main street frontage. And I only wonder that because I'm thinking about those side streets that, jet off Main Street, where if they had buildings that met these instances and they wanted to put apartments or whatever, then maybe that would apply not apply to those side streets. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, well, kind of, I have a thought that if it's conditional, that would be something, I guess it would be something the DRB could decide, but it would require those side streets to have business frontage, I think, if there is now. I don't know if Janet has any thoughts about that. Good question.
Yeah, it's absolutely worth talking about. My intent, obviously, is North Main Street.
Right.
And as you know, one side of the street, Summer Street is too far back, so it only has one street frontage. Frontage being the front of the building. But on this side that the City Hall is on, buildings flank both the front. There's a North Main Street and Merchants Row or Enterprise Alley is on their backside. So this side of the street, obviously, if you say street frontage, it could be either. So, and the very few little side streets aren't necessarily where the primary entrances are. But the intent I'm trying to achieve for discussion is preserving that front of building, our downtown use, our architectural frontage, our retail commercial space is the front of the building.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I think.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I wondered if, for example, somebody wanted to put an apartment on the Enterprise Alley side of things, what would the current zoning allow or not allow?
So that's a great question. And I need to bring up the map, and I will bring up the map for us. Excuse me, so these are the structures you're talking about, say Enterprise Alley. This is where the first thing we do is turn on the zoning districts. So this is, let's see, where is it? This is UC1, this vanilla color. So you'd have to then go to the use table, find out if residential units are allowed, and then we dive into that language we're trying to potentially modify. Enterprise Alley, Wendy, you're 100% correct, is a street. So is North Main Street, so is Creamery Court, so is Depot Square.
So right now, if I understand this correctly, you couldn't put residential there unless it was 100 feet from any of those streets.
Correct. The property line either back here or the property line up here. And that 100 feet, really, realistically, is only this section of the downtown. Because, like I said, we don't have the depth of parcels to even need that 100 feet.
But if it
So
changed
the
to
prior zoning didn't even speak to it, so it was allowed.
prior zoning to the last change.
Correct, before the 2019 big change.
So 2019 potentially allows it, but it turns out most of the buildings can't meet that 100-foot setback.
Right,
But as you know, as an example, building that is like where AR Market and Pearl Street Pizza is, that's not a big enough piece, but it would have to have, even with this change, it really would not be able to meet any even 50 feet back from Pearl Street and Main Street.
right. I think if I could show you, I can't do a line and do a parallel offset, but I think what I could try to do is draw a circle with a radius of 100. If I put it right there on AR Market's property line, that's 50 feet. I'm sorry.
But you have to move one edge of the circle to the front of the building.
Right. Right. So if I could get that line on that property line, that's the whole building.
Yeah,
So what my visual is showing you what David is saying, that 100 feet back is very deep and doesn't allow most of these buildings to have apartments now.
right. But if you did it 50, then it would allow a variety of these buildings to do that.
Right. Right. If you want to stick with a linear distance.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I was thinking. If we don't say, I mean, I think Janet, you said the intent was you were thinking Main Street frontage. I guess what I was trying to say, if we don't have a distance and we just say street frontage, I feel like there could be a lot of gray area or confusion if we aren't specific, because there are a lot of other little streets around Main Street that if it's Main Street and not the side streets, then maybe
But there's no,
depending on which way you read it, it could be allowed or couldn't. Do you know what I mean?
I can see it through that lens. I'm thinking, so if you're just talking generally street frontage, Merchants Row, none of these buildings, like say Lenny's Outlet they wanted to do residential in the back. By changing it to just say street frontage, they couldn't have an apartment that faces Merchants Row. Nobody could do an apartment that faces Enterprise Alley. It would have to be inside, so you preserve retail and commercial facing any street. I think that's what I'm trying to achieve. Well, maybe for discussion, I'm not sure it's drafted that way, so. And we don't want gray areas for sure.
Right.
well, right now, the standard is 100 feet, and it's not a standard that can be changed by conditional use. So this is being more permissive. Caitlin,
Right, and remember, this is only for the UC1 zoning district. So it's only this vanilla colored properties. So once you get beyond Granite Street and Seminary Street, you're in UC2. So what we're talking about is only this vanilla color, this yellow color. So if that helps in the discussion at all.
Caitlin, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I was just gonna kind of building off what Wendy said. I could see how there might be a little bit of gray area, but I think I actually like that because the way that Janet has reworded this, it feels more like we're being very clear about the intent, this idea of street frontage. And when we pick a number, whether it's 100 or feet or 50 feet, there's always going to be, it feels like there's always going to be an exception. Some quirky building, because no building in our downtown is, like any of the others. And um, this language helps sort of define what the intent is. I also would just add that I agree the conditional use is the way to go, because that again helps to ensure that any project that comes forward is meeting the intent and can clarify any gray area that somebody might have.
Anyone else have any thoughts?
Yeah, I would just say I was, like I said earlier, I was sort of on the fence on conditional versus right off, but I kind of come around. I think I'm broadly agreeing with the going conditional for this. Just because, like Caitlin just said, there's a lot of variation in those buildings, and that'll sort of let us be a little bit more open in how things are adjusted and not have to worry about something kind of problematic slipping through because there's another layer of review after the fact. So I'm definitely on board with that part of it.
Just seems like this allows for the most flexibility so that we aren't coming back next year and looking at another tweak to the zoning to allow for housing, at least in this very small subset of the zoning areas, while still being clear about what our intent is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this is going to be something that we see a big influx of people wanting to put apartments in the back of Main Street buildings. There could be a few. And the way we get more housing typically is a few at a time.
And every bit counts, I think, right now.
So we seem to have some consensus on that this change makes sense. And it's, if it moves forward, it's going to have to go through a public hearing process, and it's going to be looked at city council. So there'll be plenty of opportunities to make adjustments if that's appropriate. My thought is just in part because of the housing challenges we face, I kind of would like to just see it move forward now. I'm not sure that it would have a big impact or be a big part of the other downtown planning process that's going to take place. And again, I don't know if other people have thoughts on that.
I agree with you, Stuart. I feel like the sooner the better, probably. I just wonder, and I think Janet, you mentioned this about looking at the use table. I just wonder, are there other areas that we could look at to, if it has to go to, um, through to the public hearing, maybe we do it, should we do those as well?
Well, we just made a bunch of changes to encourage housing to bring the zoning ordinance in line with the requirements of the new state law. And those were adopted. So I think we kind of addressed a lot of it. This was just something that I think is sort of one-off in my mind.
Okay.
And there may be others that come up, but I guess my general thought is maybe we just ought to deal with them as they might show up.
Are those marked up on the 2 family and those three right there, are those suggestions that would,
Yes.
okay,
Yes. So as you can see underneath my red marking, we were saying in the UC1 and UC2 zoning districts, 2-family was not allowed. 3-family is not allowed currently in the UC1. So that even means on the second and third floors. So if I'm hearing you folks correctly, you're thinking 2-family, 3-family, and 3 and 4, and multifamily, all this needs to become conditional? Is that what I'm hearing from you folks?
I think the areas where it's permitted now, I would leave it that way. For the upstairs units, I don't think that would need to be conditional. It's the places where there's an X that would change to become conditional uses, I think.
So these 3 become conditional?
Yeah.
Okay. And
However,
that would bode well, because like, what if someone has a commercial building and they can only get 1 or 2 apartments in somewhere in that structure on the first floor? Clearly they can't do it. They have to have more room to be able to do more units.
that's my understanding. I wasn't even aware that somebody couldn't just put 2 or 3 uh units upstairs, that they had to have more.
Yeah.
In my general opinion, I think upper floor apartments should just be permitted. I don't even think they would need conditional use, but they have a lot of state requirements to meet and accessibility requirements to meet. Rosemary, you have your hand up?
Yes, just a quick question. Okay, so if we go conditional, I mean, what do you guys feel? You know the DRB better than I. I mean, you expect that would go through without any issue, or does anybody have any concerns about that? Maybe Janet or,
Sure, I could speak to, their requirement is, you folks at the planning commission author the zoning. Their job is to execute the zoning. They're not supposed to vote from their heart, as I say. They're supposed to weigh everything against the rules. So when we put together packets, we tell them in their packets whether we recommend or recommend to deny, because it either meets the rules or not, whether it seems like it's a good thing. So as far as I'm concerned, their role should be relatively cut and dry. What they
Right.
do when we get to their vote, they're a quasi-judicial body. They're as powerful as the city council. Their
Yeah.
vote, they can do whatever they want, unfortunately,
Yeah.
depending on what the
Well,
rules say.
no, I'm glad to know that there's a recommendation, obviously, that goes with it from what you've said, so. So
Sure,
thank you, that clarified it for me, thank you.
yep.
Let's have a quick
Wendy,
question.
Yep.
So I'm just thinking here, I'm seeing the single family dwelling. I guess, would we want to include that too if there was a commercial building where, let's say they wanted to leave or had room to put 1 apartment above their building on the second floor or even on the first floor, if it met the street frontage requirements, would we want to allow that? Because right now
The
it's
only time you're
X's.
gonna see a single-family home is if one of our big buildings comes down and somebody literally wants to build a single-family home in our downtown. And it wouldn't fit the design standards. You could certainly make it permittable or conditional, and that makes housing equitable. But I don't think you'd see it, given everything else we've got in our zoning that people have to meet. You know, facade requirements, architectural details, that kind of thing.
Okay, yeah, and I guess the way I was reading it, it just was very similar to the 2-family dwelling for the description. So I guess I wasn't thinking of it as like a single family home. I was thinking of it as like 1 apartment in a commercial building
Right.
because it says 1 household.
So I think we should make a distinction that on the first floor, what we're proposing is you have to have commercial in the front. In the front 50 feet or half of the space, I think whichever is greater. I would think that upper floor units, whether it's a single apartment or multi, shouldn't even require a conditional use. Somebody can get all the permitting to allow those on the upper floor. Why would they need further approval? The challenge is going to be, do they meet all the state standards for fire, life safety and for um, access and that sort of thing? As an example, one of the things that sometimes keeps upper floor units from going in is, do they have to put in an elevator? Any other thoughts?
I'm thinking that under the allowed uses, I don't know what page it is in our packet, I think it's up here. It's residential is prohibited on the ground floor. So I think that covers your second and third floors, but if you want to make a distinction, certainly we can.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it just says maybe they're prohibited. Maybe the change is, that the conditional use is just for the ground floor. That the ground floor residence will be allowed as a conditional use. That, I don't even think that impacts the upper floors.
Right.
And this chart seems to be a little bit more confusing.
It does actually, now that you said it that way.
So I'm wondering if it just says permitted, but then there's more specific language about ground floor, does that kind of take care of it? Or does this create a conflict in the, it looks like you have some, you have something here, you have a note P1. Is there a footnote to that?
Yes. Additional use standards apply.
So could you put P1 next to those ones up higher, which just says you need to look at the zoning because there's some additional standards?
Absolutely.
Would that resolve that question?
I think so too. I think that makes sense because, yeah, in the allowed uses, I mean, it calls out the use table and then it says in addition, and then we have that paragraph. So I think that makes sense.
So Wendy, you're saying something to the effect of this change, UC2 is residential's allowed, because the distinction here is saying ground floor residential is conditional, but then if we look at our use table, this would mean second, third, fourth floors. Everything else is permittable.
Right.
So here's the scenario. I own a building and I want to put in 2 units on the second floor. Right now, as we read this table, 2 units are not allowed. They have to have at least 3 in the UC2, 3 or 4, and then 5 in the UC1.
Yeah, no, I'm saying if we want to allow the 2, 3, and 4, we need to make the table change. What I was saying is the ground floor, because the way it's reading, in addition, I think we have what we want for the ground floor as long as we make these changes. But I'm saying for the second floor or whatever floor, the above floors, then if we make those changes, I think we'll have what we want. I don't think we need to say anything here about the upper floors.
I agree. I think we just have to change the use table say that
Yeah.
it's allowed, but put the footnote that you need to look at the ordinance because if they happen to be units on the ground floor, there's additional requirement.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I
think
think
that,
so.
I think that probably takes care of it. Which
So
also
make
means,
these P1s is what you're saying,
yeah,
Hmm.
and then leave these existing permittables alone,
yeah.
and not
Well,
speak to which
well, I
floor
guess,
anybody's
actually, you might want to put the footnote for all of them.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, should they be consistent?
Oh, okay.
In the UC2, because otherwise somebody could say, I want to build a multifamily dwelling with apartments on the first floor too, all the way to the front. And I don't think we would want that.
So now they're all P1.
For UC1 and UC2, UC3, we're leaving. Are we leaving the way they are?
Well, I think
Yes.
for now,
Okay.
on these, the footnote 1 is really to make sure people understand what they are allowed to do on the first floor.
Yeah.
I think this is a relatively simple change that will remove that 100-foot limit and opens the door for a few possibilities for sure.
Mhm.
Do you have
Oh,
another question about the allowed use paragraph under UC2? But it doesn't have to do with this, so I can hold it for at the end if you want. I mean, it's part of this document, but it has nothing to do with the residential piece.
so what do people want to do with this at this point? We want to maybe get a final draft at our next meeting and decide if we want to go forward with the hearings and start the process of making the zoning change?
Yeah,
Right.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
So do we want to, I think the changes are pretty straightforward. I'm wondering if we could ask Janet to, just, if we approve the changes, that we could ask her to schedule a hearing at the soonest possible date to start the zoning change project.
So you want a final draft review for February with the intent to have a public hearing in March?
Well, I'm asking if we could actually just, if these changes are agreeable, and we just warn a public hearing in February.
Oh, okay.
I'm asking. I'm not saying we should. I'm just asking. Or should we wait? Should we look at a final draft in February and then warn the hearing for March?
David,
What
is
works
there
better for
any
you,
way
Jan?
to have Janet make the changes that we've talked about tonight and circulate it to us via email to respond to, just to make sure that, it reflects what we've kind of come to consensus on, and that would allow the process to move forward more quickly,
Yeah,
but kind of give us a little bit of, like, if anybody notices anything weird, we can
yeah.
make
So
sure it doesn't actually go forward.
I think that makes sense. I think we should be aware of the public meeting law. We have to be careful as we do these things. There's a general rule of thumb. Uh, we actually should never be group emailing each other. We should be sending a comment to Janet and then she can distribute it to the group. That way it gets on the city's record, so to speak. And we're not having a meeting by having 6 people entertain, in a roundtable discussion. All of a sudden, we've had an unwarned meeting.
Absolutely, yeah, I would agree. We want to make sure we do it in a very open manner,
So,
but it seems like it's changes are pretty straightforward, and if the intent is to kind of help move this along quickly, since there is a
Yeah.
project, an active project
Right.
that wants to move forward and create housing in our
So,
downtown,
so, yeah,
that we could try to get it so it could be warned in February, that would be great.
yeah. So I
In my
think what we could do is if Janet circulated the draft, if anybody kind of do it with, this is the draft of what we discussed at the meeting. So, approved at the meeting. If anybody has any questions or concerns, to let her know. And then that would kind of trigger, well, I guess we better discuss it some more in February. And nobody has any, if everybody just individually Janet, looks good to me, then she can go ahead and warn it. That makes sense. Pretty tight time frame to do that and make sure we get a chance to look at it and leave time to warn the meeting enough in advance for our February date, which is actually sooner than we think because it's the second Tuesday. I'm not even sure if there's time to do it at this point. Remember we're
Yeah, I'm
meeting,
not sure either. I'll have to look, David. Thank you for reminding me of our timeframes.
and if I would say if the time frame's too tight, we just need to move it to March. But if you think we can get it done for the February meeting, that would be fine too. That would be ideal.
Our normally scheduled second February of the month.
I actually had a
Yeah,
question
what's the date
about,
of that?
it's the 13th, but I do have a question about that because there's a Ward 2 meeting because we have to pick vote on a new counselor
Oh, that's right.
at 7 o'clock. So I was gonna see if either we could shift the time of our meeting. That's important to me because I live in Ward 2.
Oh, it affects me
Um,
too.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, I was just wondering if we can meet on a different day or shift the time. So I don't know.
Could we
I was
move
gonna
it to
ask
the,
that.
well, we have
Is
the
that board
4th.
caucus really on our meeting night?
Yeah, it's at
Oh,
7
Yep.
p.m. on the
So
13th.
let me suggest that,
okay.
we usually have as a backup date, the 4th, Thursday. That would actually be the 27th. Would that be okay?
We want to wait that long.
Well, it's 2
I'd be
weeks.
fine with it.
Otherwise, we can just wait till March, but, or,
I don't think we should do that. I'm not
I
suggesting.
I think I like that suggestion because that also gives us a better chance to have it actually on the agenda for a public hearing in the February meeting if we're pushing it back 2 weeks.
right, just gives Janet a little bit of breathing room.
Yeah.
That too.
Okay,
I'm
thank
fine
you.
with that.
We'll hold another special meeting on February 27th with the intent that we're gonna have a public hearing on these changes that also include the interim changes we did last year,
Yeah,
to
okay,
make those solidified in our zoning.
perfect.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
So Janet, do you think we need a motion to say what you just said?
Um, yes, because we're talking about special meetings versus regular meetings. So I wouldn't mind a motion.
It'll probably be a good idea to make a motion to, as I said, do what Janet said. I can repeat it all so easily, but she will put the words in or whatever. Pardon?
I'll make that motion.
Okay. So Caitlin made the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second, Wendy.
Okay. And Wendy has second. We've had a lot of discussion. Does anyone have anything else to add before we vote? Okay, so all in favor, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. So we've adopted the motion, so our February meeting will be moved to the 27th, and we will have a public hearing on changes we discussed and also making permanent the interim changes that were made last year. So we can move on in the agenda. The downtown planning area grant. I'll turn the floor over to Janet for that.
Yes, I met with the consultants today. We have solidified a date for the charrette. They are going to be here March 24th through the 27th. We're going to have them meet here in council chambers. We're going to have 6 to 8 tables set up. They're going to be available all day, so folks can trickle in and look at maps and talk with the consultants and come up with ideas. Remember, we have a couple of master plans, and we're looking at what is essentially our designated downtown. A new master plan that absorbs the North Main to Summer Street plan along with something new. They asked if any of you planning commissioners might want to try to spend some time, 1 or 2 days during the charrette here. It's probably going to run 8 to 4, 5 o'clock. I think Monday is their presentation. They'll do that in the evening. So then it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday work with a final presentation. They're literally going to write the master plan as people come in. It's Northfield is doing it also. And it's a very hands-on way to write a master plan. I'm going to start doing a lot of marketing, so to speak, start sending out mailers and emails to stakeholders and people in the area, notifying them of this charrette and this master plan, and to come voice your opinions, give us ideas. What is it that we want to do in the downtown? What needs to change? What might want to be changed? So, like I said, that's the end of March. CBRPC is my liaison that's the Regional Planning Commission, for this grant. And they are wondering if any of you would like to join us on, we meet literally 20 minutes every other Thursday at 9:30, just to stay on track and make sure we're getting all the tasks done leading up to the charrette. I will send you all an email with an invite. You can react to it. If you can make it, great. Love to have you join us for 20 minutes, but keep that date available in March for the work that's going to get done on this master plan.
So if you can send all the dates out, that would be great.
Yes.
Is there anything else on the downtown planning area grant that we need to discuss? Okay, if not, we can move on in the agenda to new business. And that's discussion of Chapter 23 vacant building ordinance discussion. And this discussion, I'm sure, has come about because of the Main Street property that's proposed for purchase. And the city does have an ordinance, which I think Janet reminded us of. So I asked to put it on the agenda so we could look at that and chat about that ordinance. If there's anything that we can do to it, what the legal limits are of what's allowed to do and not find itself in years of litigation. And go from there. I will say up front, I am involved with the ADC. I would probably abstain from some of these votes. But I think we should have the opportunity to discuss this. So put it there. I know, Janet, over the years, I think the Planning Commission has talked about this in the past. Its limits are to what legally can be done with vacant buildings. department. If you could provide some background, Janet, if I'm not asking too much.
No, I'll be honest, I don't remember us talking about it much in my 12 and a half years here. We've made changes as they've come up from the staff levels. For example, some of the exemptions got strengthened. A lot of the problem comes with state law. We can't always, we don't have the ability to condemn buildings. It's not an easy thing to change, I don't think. But as you can see, all the different amendments we've had, we try to keep it alive and working. This is not an ordinance that my office administers. This is administered by the code enforcement folks of the fire department. But David's right, it's become under scrutiny, and I think it's worth talking about. Nobody likes a vacant building anywhere.
Yeah.
Not even where I live.
Would it be worth inviting people from the fire department who oversee this to chat and maybe see if they have some suggestions or thoughts about what might be done? My other concern, quite frankly, is that this kind of ordinance cuts through a lot of things. So for example, we talk about structurally unsound buildings. I don't know why the city would need to do any buyouts of flood damaged properties. Why not just say they're structurally unsound and tear them down and put a lien on the property? Be done with it. That's, I mean, I'm being a little facetious, but, an ordinance that talks about unsafe buildings and what can be done is not just talking about building a commercial building, it's also talking about residential. There are quite a few that are damaged by floods, and I suspect there are others in the community where apartments have been empty for a long time where similar kind of issues could arise. So I'm just saying it's a tricky thing to deal with. The other thing I was always led to understand, and I may be wrong, is that if an owner was actively trying to sell their building, a lot of this stuff didn't apply. I don't know if that's true or not, but that was something that I have been told over the years when questions have been asked. And my understanding on that Main Street property is that's why there's a for sale sign in the window, and there has been for 10 years. That's just some background and thoughts. So I don't have all the answers, but that's what I kind of know about it.
Sure. I know one thing we talk about at the staff level is, to your statement about, in theory, it would be wonderful if it's structurally damaged, it's not being taken care of, somehow the city takes it over and tears it down. Well, there's a monetary value to that. And I can tell you, it's not necessarily cheap to pay for all that demolition, but that needs to be thought of when we're talking about, hey, let's just, tear down a building because the owner is negligent. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what needs to be changed in the ordinance that meets what an attorney would be looking at. We definitely would have to get the city attorney involved in updating this ordinance to meet what everybody's concerns are, for sure.
I think David, you had a good
In the room with me, Ed Stanek, he walked in while we were talking, and I think at some point Ed would like to speak. I don't know if the owl will look at you if you speak up.
Sit here.
Anywhere where you can get the
No,
owl.
it's looking at you now.
Yeah.
You can stay where you are. It was
Yeah.
looking at you.
Okay,
We can see you.
all right.
I want to start by just giving an opportunity for any planning commissioners who might want to say anything to speak, and then we'd be glad to hear from the others that are at the meeting. So any planning commissioners who have any?
I think, David, this is Wendy. I think you had a good idea. I think, talking or having the fire department, maybe the code enforcement officer come in to talk about this might be helpful because I'm just looking at some of the definitions in here. And I don't know. I mean, depending on how you read this, I almost feel like it's a matter of opinion of who's looking at it. So maybe getting like some information from them about like when they're looking at things, how they perceive things or do what they do might be helpful before we make changes.
Oh, you have your hand up?
Yes. Yeah. So broadly, I think bringing in the fire department's good. I also wonder if it's worth bringing in the city's lawyers to one of these meetings. I'm not sure how the money for that works, if they're just on retainer and can do that periodically, or if that would cost extra. I assume if it's the latter, that might put a damper on that idea. But I think including them would definitely be worthwhile because, as you say, they would have to be involved in rewriting the ordinance anyway. So including them in the discussion from the beginning, and even being able to broadly speak about what's allowable and what's not, would be worthwhile, I think. Other than that, I think it's really good that we're looking at this. I think it's overdue, for a lot of reasons. Yeah.
So I think, Janet, you might be able to talk to the city manager about whether we could at some point arrange to have the city's attorney available for a meeting. That's one thought. The other is, I just want to ask a question about whether this is an ordinance that's a zoning ordinance that is in the planning commission's things to manage, or whether this belongs somewhere else. Whether the planning commission is the proper body to consider. I don't know the answer I'm asking, because as soon as you said, well, the fire department administers building things, that's just the question is, where is the appropriate place for this discussion to take place, and who can initiate this particular ordinance?
I can say based on statute, the planning commission has the ability to weigh in on other ordinances, but it is not your primary function. I personally think all comments are welcome. I think it should be done more updating a draft with staff and the city manager with input from people and get it in front of the city council so we talk about these things. There's a process that we used to follow in the past where changes were brought up, not even for a vote. It's just, here's some edits, here's some changes. It's a nice way to get the public to weigh in on things. That's just my opinion.
But from a perspective of the planning commission, this is not an ordinance where we would have a hearing and then send it on to city council. This is something that would be a change that would be in city council's jurisdiction to change the ordinance, but we could make comments and suggestions. Something that has to go through a planning commission process with hearing and so on.
I'd have to review statute again. I think it is not under your purview, but I could be all wrong. So I could certainly let everybody know.
Okay. And Rosemary, you have your hand up.
I'm just wondering what role Mr. Stanek is playing in all of this.
Well, he's going to get an opportunity to speak.
Okay.
So
And will this affect anything that the city just voted on as it relates to the Newberry building?
Any changes probably would come after if Barre Area Development raises their $600,000. I think it's a timing issue. I think they have till May. And so ordinance changes go in front of the city council.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other commissioners have any thoughts or questions? If not, I guess now would be the time for others in attendance. If you'd like to speak to, this would be your chance.
Yeah, I'm one of the others in attendance. By way of introduction, my name is Ed Stanek. I'm a resident at 58 Pleasant Street and have been there since 1984, about 40 years, hard to believe. I attended the city council meeting on December 30th about a different subject, which I don't really want to get into because I see it as, not related to chapter 23. And In preparation for the city council meeting, however, I did review chapter 23. I had a few years of experience working for the state dealing with land use issues, so I wanted to do my homework going to the city council meeting. And in reading chapter 23 and also the enabling state legislation, I'll deal with that first. I was struck by how ancient the state enabling legislation is. It hasn't been touched in a very long time. The fines that are allowed under the state statute are ridiculous. As I do this from memory, I think it was like a $50 fine. $50 fine is not going to get the attention of any property owner to take action in the year 2025. So I looked at the enabling legislation, I looked at chapter 23 of the ordinance. You know, I want to be upfront and say it's a pretty good ordinance. My issue is not with the wording of the ordinance so much as it is there a way to ensure more timely, expedited enforcement of that ordinance in a gradual fashion. You know, this is very Orwellian for me sitting here. I'm not sure where to look. You folks are on the screen and Janet's over here. I'm an old guy, so I'm sort of struggling with George Orwell here as I'm speaking, you know. But having said that, the ordinance, as I said, I think is pretty well framed the way it is. My interest is, thank you, Janet, I have a good person here to talk to. My interest is to beef it up, for lack of better language, so that it can be enforced in a more timely manner in a gradual fashion. So if we have a particular property owner who's not being nudged along to deal with the vacant and abandoned building, and we have a history of the code staff documenting that it is indeed a dangerous or unsafe or unhealthy building, but the property owner is doing nothing, it sort of frustrates the public good that nothing happens. We don't ever get to the finish line. Now, I'm the first one to say private property rights must be respected. And I'm not in favor of just going in there and getting a wrecking ball and tearing down somebody's property. That's not my mission. And I also want to emphasize, nothing that I'm talking about has anything to do with a specific property at all. I certainly don't want to wind up being sued, you know. But I will say this, and I don't know if it was shared with the Planning Commission, there was a companion memorandum that I wrote at the same time I wrote about chapter 23. And the companion memorandum dealt with a case study of a particular property on Main Street, the history of its code inspections. And you know, maybe if you haven't seen it, you want to take a look at it. And again, I'm not trying to I'm not suggesting change chapter 23 to deal with any particular specific property, because that would be, as known in criminal law, selective prosecution. And that's not my objective. I did poke around a little bit on a very superficial manner with other Vermont municipalities to see what they had for a comparable ordinance, and that's in the memo which you've seen. I looked at St. Albans, I looked at Burlington, but I think, and I suggest if the Planning Commission or if staff is going to get in it, you know, I'm a retired guy, there's nothing good on TV, so I'm willing to do a little more research here myself. But I'm really interested in what other municipalities in the United States have done in order to address this issue with their downtown and other areas. You know, there are other cities in the United States which have terrible structures hanging out in their downtown, and they dealt with it successfully and brought about a renaissance in their downtown. I also wonder if this is not a good genesis to talk to our legislators under the Golden Dome to amend the state statute. It really is outdated. You know, for example, the demolition, if you get to that dire strait where the building has to be demolished, as I understand it, it's on the back of the municipality to do that. The municipality has to then assume the cost, has to try and recoup its losses through a lien. That's sort of ridiculous to me in the 21st century. Why isn't that onus on the property owner? If it's such an unsafe building, why doesn't state law enable the municipality to require through the ordinance that the property owner has to step in and bring the building down? So there's a lot of questions here, and I'm the first one to say, I'm not here tonight to say, here's the definitive answer. I'm here as a retired guy to say I'm willing to help. I'm also willing just to participate as a public citizen if the Planning Commission wants to come up with some proposals and participate in another meeting. So in a long-winded fashion, that's my story. You know, again, I'm interested in beefing up the ordinance. I love Barre City. When we moved in from Marshfield, you know, we moved to Barre on purpose. I have a very dear heart. I'm You know, I was on the board of trustees for the old labor hall for a long time, and I have a passion, you know, for rejuvenating the downtown Barre. I think it has such enormous potential. Anyway, that's all I have to say in a long-winded fashion.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Jeremy, you have your hand up as well?
Yes, thank you. I'd actually love to get into a room with you sometime, Ed, because you and I are largely on the same page here. I think it's a great idea to revisit the ordinance. Before I go on, Jeremy Sparwin, Barre City resident, also shares similar passion for the town and downtown and all that. I was really excited to see when that this meeting was coming up, because I've actually been kind of in my spare time looking at chapter 23 as well, and thinking about some ways that it might be modified. And I had a few thoughts. One would be to remove, there's section 23, 11E, contains some exemption categories that I believe were what Mr. Sitchell was referring to when he was talking about how a building, if it's posted for sale, it's effectively, there's a loophole that allows it to be left vacant for as long as it wants. So that would be one suggestion, would be just entirely striking that section. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm sure there's, you know, some fine details around here that probably need to be finessed, but that seems redundant, and like it provides just unnecessary loopholes for you know, building owners who aren't really abiding by the spirit of the law to skate by on. I think we could amend section 12A to say the code enforcement team shall administer and enforce the law rather than may, just because it, you know, makes it clear that that's an expectation. And then 16B, which lays out the fine schedule. I could, from what Mr. Stanek said, it could well be that I have misunderstood something. My understanding was that the enabling legislation allowed fines up to $800. And if that's the case, if that's allowed, I would suggest adding additional escalation categories and escalating all the way up to the maximum amount we were allowed to do, so that the law really both has loopholes that have been closed, and then once those loopholes are closed, teeth that can actually you know, create a real incentive to for delinquent landlords to move on and allow the property to become purchased by somebody at a reasonable price, whoever that property owner is, wherever that property is, so that it can be repurposed for better use. So if anyone does want to reach out to me, I'm happy to share the specific modifications I've made there. But yeah, thanks for having this meeting, and thanks for talking about this subject. I think it'd be great if we moved on with this.
So I think it would be helpful if you could write down the comments and send them to Janet.
Absolutely, sure.
That would just kind of help make sure we get it.
Yeah, I know it. Usually we'll have it in writing. This is a little last minute for me.
And from listening to Janet, it sounds like maybe this process starts at the city staff level to kind of get all these things together. If they may want to talk to the city attorney in advance of any public meetings, even just to kind of get everything sorted out and bring something that then could be considered by the city council or planning commission or whomever the appropriate place for that to go is. That makes sense to you, Janet?
Yeah, it does. That's a good suggestion. I'll meet with Nicholas and find out really which entity should be taking this on. Is it staff bringing it to city council? And then try to solicit, you know, people like Jeremy and Ed who have suggestions and get some active comments. I will look up the statutory requirements for the planning commission and let you folks know in a separate email if it's actually within your purview or not. So at least you know, you can move it forward, or it should be done by the city council. Yeah, I think that's important to know what your role is in ordinances in general.
I mean, in any event, any ordinance ends up in front of the city council, even if it's a zoning ordinance that we've had our statutory hearings and all. So the city council is the final final word, whether we should have a role or whether staff should be doing something and then communicating through the manager with city council as a starting point or whatever, I guess would be helpful for us to know.
Absolutely.
But I guess that, I think the concern that's been expressed is that um, something happens. Some consideration to it and see what's possible and what's not possible. I'm sure that the city attorney will place some guardrails on it because that's what attorneys do. But you got to start somewhere.
That's right.
Anything else anybody has on this item? I would ask Janet, that you just keep us updated on kind of what's going on and if and how we might be involved.
Absolutely. And remember, I'll email you as a body. Any comments come back, just don't reply all, just reply to me. And
Yeah.
I will collectively collect any thoughts by you folks until our next meeting.
Okay.
Thank
Yes. Somebody else have something to add? If not, we can move along in the agenda. Next item is we're confirming our meeting of February 13th, but actually we're confirming our meeting of February 27th. We made that change earlier in our discussion. Next item is any staff updates, and I know Janet provided material. I don't know if there's anything you would like to add, Janet?
No, just, I tried to be as comprehensive as possible. The assessors are gonna start, like I said, the assessors are out. They're gonna start looking at properties, getting ready for the April 1st deadline for tax season and grievance periods. Buyouts continue, very busy doing that. Working with city council on elevation money, so there'll be more said about that at future meetings.
And I did have one question, and that is, I see that the application for municipal planning grants is open.
Yes.
Is there anything that the city might be applying for or any thoughts that you might have?
I'll be honest and say I don't have the capacity, and the two that I applied for, I'm probably gonna have to give up, because luckily we have the new master plan planning grant, but not at this moment.
Okay, just thought
Unless
I would,
somebody comes up with an idea, I'm happy to hear it. Otherwise, I'll be honest, I haven't even thought about those kinds of things.
okay, well, I appreciate you being straightforward about it. But I thought I would
Yeah.
ask since something came through my email announcing it. Then the next item is round table. Do any commissioners have anything they'd like to bring up or discuss? Yes, Wendy.
Something that I noticed earlier when we were talking about the allowable uses, sorry, I gotta scroll to that page. It was on page, well, let's see, page 13 of the packet. And it's under the UC2 for the Urban Center 2. And it's 2102.B. It says, I guess this is a question for the others. It said food service drive-throughs are prohibited on UC2. I just happened to notice it because I was looking at the map. Don't we have a food service drive-through in where Dunkin' Donuts is on Main Street? Too. So I guess I'm just trying to understand or see if this needs to be updated or not, or how that, just asking that question.
So just remember, Wendy, anything that is in existence now is what we call grandfathered. or to use the appropriate term, non-conforming, that would
Okay.
be anything new. So there's a new building,
Okay.
he wants to put a new drive-through, that is saying nothing new. But
Okay.
anything in existence gets to stay in existence, if that helps clarify.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
There's,
Because I was like,
there's a
that
long
doesn't make
history.
sense.
There's a long history to what happened with that Dunkin' Donuts. There's a
Okay.
long story, but the city ended up suing the DRB over it and city lost.
Oh, okay. I did not
Like I
realize that.
said, that is the really short version.
Okay. Good to
Long
know.
story.
Okay. Well, that I just happened to notice it when we were reviewing it, so I just wanted to ask before I forgot. So, okay. Well, thank you. That makes sense. That's it for
And
me.
anyone else have anything to add? If not, then I guess the next item on the agenda is adjournment. Happy to accept a motion to adjourn the meeting.
A motion to adjourn, Wendy.
I'll second.
Wendy moved, and a second.
I'll second.
Okay, Joe seconded. So all in favor, say aye or raise your hand.
I
So we've adjourned. We're right on schedule. Actually, 8 minutes ahead. Thank you, Eric. Raylene. Oh, you're raising your hand to adjourn. I guess we're all set. So thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
I
Bye.